Good morning. Welcome to First Look. I'm Gene Sykes. I'm the chair of the Alliance for Southern California Innovation, and we're very happy to have you at First Look this morning. Let me tell you a bit about it. First Look is an annual celebration of entrepreneurship and the commercialization of frontier technology and life sciences discovery that showcases the breakthroughs emerging from Southern California's top research institutions and universities. The goal is to showcase the unstoppable talent and connect them with the vast resources of the region, such as investors, mentors, leadership team members, and valuable networks. This year, we're utilizing WOVA, an event platform to supplement the virtual experience in order to better connect the First Look community with each other. This is, of course, what we at the Alliance want to do. We want to be the super connector for all of the innovation and entrepreneurship that's present throughout Southern California. First Look began about 10 years ago, and it was hosted for several years by LAVA, the Los Angeles Venture Alliance. This is the second year that we've done it virtually, given the pandemic, and we hope to see everyone in person next year. The event this year features a diverse array of technologies, market solutions, and approaches across life sciences, including therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, and technology tomorrow with hardware, computing, and clean tech. This reflects many of the key areas of innovation in our ecosystem. We have 14 separate Southern California institutions from across the region that are represented this year, and we have 27 teams presenting, of which 18 have diverse leadership teams. 10 are women-led, 13 are led by people of color, and 6 are led by women and people of color, which is, of course, a great reflection of our community. We want to thank our generous sponsors. First of all, Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich and Rosati, the platinum sponsor, KPB LLP, our Tech Track sponsor, and Alexandria Venture Investments and East West Bank, who are gold sponsors. We cannot do the work of the First Look without their engaged support, and we very much appreciate it. So have a great day. I think it'll be a wonderful learning experience for everyone, and I hope everyone comes away with some new insight about technologies present in Southern California.
Great. Hey, Andy, you're on.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. I think we have, is my host with us? He is. Hi, Andy, how are you?
Good, how are you, Andy?
Great to see you, and thanks tons for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you here, and I have to announce to everyone that we have pulled you back to Southern California after a, I don't know, is it 10 or 15 year break to the Midwest and Washington, D.C. So once again, welcome to First Look and welcome home.
Thank you.
So what I thought I would do with our chat today is do two things: talk a little bit about your background, which I think is extraordinary, kind of delve into your view on innovation, and then talk about COVID. I think we can't have a conversation about with you about innovation, because I think COVID is a great case study and some of your perspectives on that, and then wrap up with some views around investing in healthcare innovation. So that's the roadmap. It's probably ambitious for a 30-minute conversation, so we'll see how it goes. But you are a fascinating guy, and I'm obviously thrilled to have you as a friend and collaborator. But you were a consultant, you were an entrepreneur, obviously a successful healthcare executive, an incredibly committed civil servant, both for the Obama and Biden administration. Your investing activity through Town Hall Health Ventures. You're a troubleshooter, right? Healthcare.gov, and thank you so much for your work on the vaccine rollout. So I'm going to kind of give you a little round of applause for that, especially because of you, we'll all be together sometime soon. So thank you for great success there. I would add pundit and kind of a strategist, and most recently, I think earlier this week, an author with your new book, Preventable. So given all that kind of mosaic, I would like you to just kind of describe to our audience kind of who you are. it's such an amalgamation. So I'll let you introduce yourself, but over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, note the artfully placed book that Lana placed right over my right ear.
Yeah, your marketing director.
Yeah, exactly. My marketing director. For those of you who don't know Lana, she's my wonderful wife. And hopefully you get a chance to meet her. It's great to be here. Very exciting. Very excited to be back. I guess I'm kind of a problem solver. Probably like I think most people on the phone would describe themselves. I got an opportunity. Did largely in the private sector for my entire career. Was an entrepreneur, and that was driven by the loss of my roommate from college who died of a brain tumor. Sort of led me into healthcare. It's kind of a long story, but from there, I realized that I built this business up called Optum, which became a very big business within United Health Group. And then when healthcare.gov got into trouble, I was the troubleshooter. And by the way, it's not all roses to be known as a troubleshooter. As I was walking around the West Wing a few weeks ago, getting ready to skulk out, the vice president stopped me and asked if I was interested in working on the Northern Triangle troubleshooting. So, which I pretended like I couldn't hear her. So I just said, I'm not getting that, don't know. But I think I'm going to try to limit my troubleshooting. But if the country gets into trouble and it's around healthcare, I've now had two roads in, and I realized that, private sector thinking is important for the public sector, and public sector thinking is really important for the private sector. So it's great to know both and how they work, because in healthcare, we're all government contractors, whether we want to admit it or not. That's where largely the money comes from, taxpayers. And we need to spend it well and do it well. And I love government service, but I also love innovation.
Well, it's nice that you can kind of flip back and forth, and we're going to have to give you a troubleshooter superhero cape so you can be on standby. I want to kind of talk about innovation, with the role of innovation to troubleshooting. And maybe you could kind of also cite some examples where you feel like kind of maybe breaking away from the status quo of doing something non-traditional allowed some sort of breakthrough.
Yeah, I mean, look, healthcare, as everyone, is all about solving problems for people. And there's obviously, you got to carve it into life sciences and non-life sciences. And lest we forget, the basic research done over the last 20 years on the mRNA platform is kind of one of the reasons why we're out of this mess that we're in. And the sort of Moderna partnership with NIAID and NIH, is something we should all feel extraordinarily proud of. We funded it, and it was the best of private sector, public sector coming together. In the non life sciences side of healthcare, where I think we need a ton of innovation, I look at it a bit differently. And I think there the common thread is many of us get an okay experience from the healthcare system, but a lot of people don't even get that. There's a real dichotomy between what I often describe as the Peloton crowd, those of us who view healthcare as a betterment exercise, and we tend to be good at navigating our way around the healthcare system. We don't love it, but we can get what we want out of it. It costs too much, et cetera. But the bigger problem is we've got 130 million or so Americans that are on low income or sort of fixed incomes that have 10 years lower life expectancy, that can't access the healthcare system very well, can't afford to, can't access the best physicians or clinicians, get a lot of runaround, and then all the other things in their life, right? Their housing, their childcare, everything else just sort of breaks down on them. Tons of room for innovation. And I think that's where Town Hall's been focused, because it's an area that I just see just sort of like blinking lights as opportunity. And I think there's room for some great companies in that space.
Well, it's interesting, I know we share a bunch of collaborators at Kaiser, and they were kind of one of the first people to think about kind of, healthcare really as a systematic kind of approach, and, quality of life and employment and nutrition, rather than kind of dealing with, someone who has a affliction and, once they get in the hospital. So I think that systems thinking is super important. How do you think, when you think about, the global competitive landscape, any sense of, how we're stacking up as a country? I know I read recently about the $200 billion US Innovation and Competition Act $200 billion is big money. It seems feel like China's maybe making more aggressive investments. Do you think, how do we stack up, and do we need to make those type of government funded bold strokes to get back in the game or keep ourselves in the front of the pack?
Well, not only that, but I found it fascinating that this sort of Boeing Airbus battle, which has raged since ever since probably any one of us can remember,
Right.
they basically called a truce and said, yeah, we need to go beat China because China's the real threat here. And I think this sort of G7 type leadership and approach and collaboration is very promising because we've got to build markets together. We got to innovate together. We've got talent there together. And look, I do think there is a vision where I'll just take vaccines because it's just topical. I mean, we can become the arsenal and the net exporter of 8-9 billion vaccines a year. I mean, we're short now. We make about 4 billion vaccines as a world every year. We're going to need to add 11 billion to that arsenal, and maybe not all that needs to be done every year, but certainly some segment of it. So there's a massive opportunity to vaccinate the globe, and there's no reason why we can't do that kind of thing here. Antivirals, same thing. There is a whole world and a whole marketplace. So every one of these disruptions, and the pandemic is nothing if not a disruption, creates opportunities to solve problems. It creates opportunities for profiteering too, and I think it's important to distinguish. I'm not in favor of people who are exploiting these opportunities. But if you look at these, this as something that shines a light on some really significant problems we've always had, and they extend like everything else. Health extends to everything, right? So we've just seen all of these kids now who don't have internet at home. We don't invest in that. We don't invest as a country in making sure that every kid has internet access at home. Then yeah, we're gonna be behind the rest of the world, and we deserve it.
And do you think, having been in the belly of the beast, having the government deploy hundreds of billions and trying to raise the level of play, is that prudent, or there's also in the private sector? So I'm wondering whether what is the balance there, and is that
It's
dollars
a both
well spent, or is that kind of overloading the system with?
It's a both and.
Yeah.
And it's not the most efficient mechanism, but it is where most of the capital is. So if it's a national priority, we ought to be putting that capital out. We can put it out in innovative ways. There's nothing which says we need to give it all to some government contractor. I mean, there are innovative ways to put capital out there and to match capital and to put capital into states. And I'm in favor of making the capital available closer to the ground, because it's what the federal government can't do is by and large see all of the opportunities. But my view, the capital should be closest to where the problem is most visible. So if there's an NIH center, they may have the most visibility into the problem, but so may MD Anderson, so may UCLA, so you want to get the capital to the problem solvers where people say, hey, you know what, if we had combined your smarts with our capital, with this talent, then that's how we solve this problem. It's when those things get mismatched. So the government has to do it in a smart way. But I certainly can't say we overinvest in R&D right now.
I think part of it, just speculating, is those are big numbers, and it's almost just a line in the sand saying this is a priority, right? And the government kind of speaks by allocating capital just to say we can't take this for granted, and it becomes almost a rallying cry, for the country to say, innovation is a competitive landscape, and we just can't take leadership for granted. So we need to kind of put our eye back on the ball and work together. I mean, obviously I'm biased because our work at the Alliance is all about collaboration. Right. We have great individuals and organizations that work, but if we work collectively and kind of work at different angles and with different stakeholders, we think we can kind of get real breakthroughs.
There's something else that's important to this too, which it's tangential, but I think it's something to talk about nonetheless. It's really important that we keep some set of issues separate from partisanship.
Yeah.
So like neither party needs to own innovation. It's not in anybody's interest for this to be an issue that only gets funded when either a Republican or Democrat is in the majority.
Yeah.
And so innovation is a perfect issue around that, right? Innovation and competitiveness. I mean, both sides can rally for their own ideas, but in general, when a package gets put together, it's great to see bipartisan support. I mean, and by the way, that's what the country wants to see, that there's some things that are just in our common interest. And, so it was encouraging to see bipartisan sponsorship of things like that, because once things get into claimed by one party and disowned by the other, it's not good for us.
It's funny, we've been cautious at the Alliance of taking government funding just for that reason, is that we don't want to end up being, a tool in one person's toolbox, so that by definition you're not in the other person's, and it becomes, an either or versus, hey, we're just focused on, helping the ecosystem and, drive innovators to create breakthrough products. One of the questions before we switch gears, and it kind of maybe ties into the COVID experience, you're talking about innovation. I know there's been some discussion around potentially having a holiday for intellectual property around the vaccines. Any point of view in terms of, obviously we need to get as many people in the world vaccinated. I was pleased to see where I am in Pasadena, we just got recognized as having the highest vaccine rate in a large city in California. And, there's kind of it's like a network effect. You get to that tipping point, we all need to have it. So I feel more comfortable myself. So getting vaccines to across the world and lowering the cost of those, I guess that would be the rationale. Any perspective on, is that a good idea, a bad idea? Obviously rely on the private sector, not just the government, to drive innovation. So you can think of kind of the downside of maybe removing some of those protections or revenue streams associated with R&D investment.
Well, look, in the end, we have to vaccinate the globe. We vaccinated, the majority of people here in the U.S. We got more to do, but many countries are at 1% to 2%, and those are countries that, like Haiti, like Sub-Saharan Africa, they'll be like India and Brazil. When it comes there, it'll be devastating. So we have a aligned mission to vaccinate the globe, and under every circumstance, you talk about private sector, public sector, it's going to be the exact same people doing the work. The pharma companies need to do the tech transfer. The pharma companies will need to supply the IP. The same people will need to do distribution. But guess what? The same people will be paying for it, and it's largely the U.S. taxpayer. And the U.S. taxpayer can't pay for all of it. It's going to could cost by some estimation $70 billion to vaccinate the globe. There's no way that can be on the backs of the federal U.S. taxpayer. And that's if we vaccinate the wealthy countries at profit margins and the poor and middle income countries at cost. There's no way we can afford to vaccinate Africa at the same price we're paying for the US. And by the way, nobody disputes that. Pfizer doesn't dispute that. Moderna doesn't dispute that. And because these things were built collaboratively, whether it's from the German taxpayer, the US taxpayer, or what have you. But so I think this IP issue could become a distraction, because it won't. Those things aren't going to change no matter what. I think the argument. Look, I went. You'll be pleased to know that I got the straw that the next day after it was passed, I went in front of all the pharma CEOs and biotech CEOs and their investors to talk about it. And what I said was, we needed to collaborate on this yesterday to get it done. We need to collaborate on it today to get it done. The biggest mistake that anybody can make is to kind of overreact to this. I think the statement by the US, which is a statement that I think we made by the globe, is we are not going to let anything get in the way of equitably vaccinating and protecting the world. And we're not going to let anybody's IP get in the way of that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that anything changes when it comes down to the fact that, the manufacturers hold the keys and are vital to the ingredient, are vital to getting it done. So they're going to get paid what they're going to get paid. And I don't think there's very much dispute about what they're going to get paid when it comes to vaccinating the world. I think they get it. By the way, they've been great partners. Moderna, Pfizer. I can't say enough about what we found, the collaboration, the cooperation, and working with them when I was inside Biden administration.
That's great to hear. And I know, record time to getting the vaccines approved in the arms of many people. one of our lighthouse companies here in Southern California is Illumina, which, as you know, is really an expert in kind of genomics. And I always surprised, and I've said this before, I never realized that many of these vaccine developers, especially the RNA ones, never had a virus. It was just kind of is all computer coding essentially that feeds, that virus, kind of vaccine development, which I think is kind of thinking of just a game changer, right? Moving it kind of out of the lab to really kind of, mechanics is super exciting. So let's kind of maybe switch a little further into kind of this COVID experience. It's fresh in your mind. Kind of what specifically did the Biden administration have you doing? What superhero cape did you have on, and what assignments did you get, to make this?
I was, first of all, part of a team of some great people. Tony Fauci, Rochelle Walensky, Jeff Zients, Ron Klain is the chief of staff. Essentially the job to do was in some respects quite simple, which is more, better, faster vaccination. So, we were in a race, we felt, against the variant and against the public's being very worn out. And, I think through a variety of things we did, we probably cut in half the time it took to vaccinate folks. I mean, we were looking, when we got there wasn't even enough vaccine. There was no inventory. Only half of the vaccines were getting into people's arms. The rest of it was sort of disappearing. There was no inventory system. There weren't nearly enough vaccinators. There were no vaccination sites. There were no vaccines in pharmacies. There were no federal sites. So we sent out FEMA, we sent out the military, we turned the plants on 24/7. We did everything. I mean, basically, in that situation, in a crisis, you do everything. If it's a good idea, you do it. We called on the help from everybody who was willing to help. And then that's just the supply side. We spend probably half our effort on the demand side, because when we got there, only 40% of people even said they would take the vaccine if offered to them. So, that was all going on in the background. My role was to kind of interface with most of the private sector. And number two, to lead public communications. Because one of the things we felt was that the public was fatigued and untrusting, and felt like they weren't getting the truth, and that science and the scientists weren't allowed to speak for themselves in the prior administration. And I don't mean that as a political comment. I just mean that as kind of what our observation was. And so felt like we needed to fix that. And I was handed the job of saying, let's make sure we reestablish trust and transparency with the public. And that was another key element of my assignment.
Well, that's probably, I can imagine that was a big task, because the undermining of public trust is something that I think had been developing over the last few years. And then you can kind of fix this supply chain problem by kind of getting the right pieces in the right place. But,
right.
When winning the hearts and minds is a little bit harder. So I don't know. How did you, I feel like we've done pretty well given the skepticism. What was there kind of, was it just consistency, or what do you think kind of changed people's attitude to kind of say, this is worth doing?
Give you one example. I got asked the question, people were very frustrated and they couldn't get their vaccines and, couldn't get scheduled. And I said, look, let me just be clear. We have a shortage. That shortage is going to last for several weeks, if not a couple months. But after that, we will no longer have a shortage. We will have an abundance. And I know this is difficult for the public, because we're not used to having shortages here in the US. Mm-hmm. We're used to getting what we want when we want it. So it's going to be very challenging. That's all I said. You wouldn't believe the barrage of response I got from that. Nurses, doctors, people who just literally said, I feel like this was the first day I was told the truth. Mm. I feel like I've been promised, 100 million this, billions that, around the corner, it's going to end, et cetera. And they're like, what you said wasn't optimistic, but all of a sudden, my blood pressure went way down, was the gist of it. Or people saying, and so you respect people enough to know they can handle the truth, and you respect people enough to not overpromise them, and then you have to deliver. And if you deliver, you start to earn back people's trust. And then when it came to people who wanted to take the vaccine versus not, I think some of this was success breeds success, right? So if we had vaccinated the first 10 million people and it hadn't worked, like a lot of people would have been like, screw that, or people would have gotten very sick. But I'm like, look, this is as good a product as you're going to market. I mean, there's not a lot of things that work at 95% and are very well tolerated. So our job is just to be successful, then let the data speak for itself, and then respect people's process. Because there was this line of where people were like, it just bordered on manipulation. We got to convince people why they should be vaccinated and all that. And I said, that's all fine, but respect the fact that people have legitimate questions, treat them legitimately, figure out who they trust, and get the information to those people. And I guarantee you who they trust isn't the government, and it's not big pharma. Who they trust is their doctor, their clergy, their pharmacist. So we created a program to get really reliable information to those people. And my enemy, quite honestly, was Facebook. Because if you weren't sure you wanted to be vaccinated or not, and you got on Facebook and you expressed a little bit of doubt, and you said, does it harm my fertility? Facebook is genius at knowing what to serve you up if you've got doubts. And so so if I was competing against anything, it was against the platforms, and I was talking to the platforms every week, if not more frequently, about how they could do a better job, because I think they did a disservice to the country in some respects. Some of them did.
Interesting. And I have to say, in terms of social media, it's been a bit more pleasant the last 6 months. Do you think, are we going to need boosters? Many people, I assume, in this conference have been vaccinated. Is your expectation that, I know that on an annual basis, like the flu shot, you need to get on a regular basis, but do you think, given the variants, that people should have an expectation that they're going to need some sort of adjustment? I don't know what the right word is, in the short term.
So we don't know yet, but right now, if I were to speculate, I'd say that come fall, we probably will at least want to vaccinate older people before the winter. I think there's some sense that immunity wanes faster among seniors. And so I think it would be probably smart. We don't know, we may not need it because you may be a good T cell memory, but we're not sure. So I think that's probably what we'll do. My sense is it will be the same exact booster. If we do it, it won't be adjusted for the variant, because I think we feel pretty good, at least about the Pfizer and Moderna, and reasonably good about the J&J as well, and Novavax, the way they handle the variants. So eventually, and so whether or not we'll need to get vaccinated once a year, once every 2 years, what have you, we don't know yet. But if you assume that we do, you can. We're already testing bivalents along with the flu vaccine. And if a variant pops up, we need to make some adjustment, then you can imagine a trivalent. And the FDA has, I think, adjusted the processes to make it easier for innovators to start to do those, to make those kinds of trials happen faster.
Can you, not to be People Magazine here, but can you share? No one's worked in the White House. No one. Very few people have had the opportunity to work in the White House in a crisis, and Fauci is kind of a little bit of superhero for me in terms of somebody who's navigated difficult circumstances, not just the pandemic, but the politics of something that frankly shouldn't be political. Is there maybe a personal anecdote or story that you think is reflective of experience or particularly memorable to you that you might share?
Yeah. Well, look, I'd be doing myself a disservice if I didn't say buy the book, Buy Preventable. And by the way, I've just learned that all the sales through Saturday, could get me on the New York Times bestseller list. So I'm going to be excessively whorish about it and say, if you're going to buy it by Saturday. But because I spent the last year before, in the Trump administration, working and interfacing directly with Jared Kushner, Debbie Birx, and others. And so the book very much lays out verbatim the kind of behind the scenes things that were going on. And there was a lot more, if you wanted to be People Magazine, there's a lot more scurrilous stuff going on there because there were different camps. People were not always aligned, and they're working for a man who was very kind of mercurial, but trying to kind of shape perception. In Biden, in some respects, like every president, I think to some degree, was elected as a bit of the antidote. Mm-hmm. So his leadership has been incredibly steady. I tell a story in the preface of the book where he called me into the Oval and said, Andy, can you explain this so that a junior in high school can understand what's going on and what to do? And we had a conversation, and in the end and what he said was, I don't want anybody out there trying to make me look good. I want you to give the public the information they need. And so first of all, my job was made 100 times easier by that. I mean, I just remember watch people like Debbie Birx try to like please the president in the stuff she says. It's just confusing. It's hard. And so feeling like what he wanted me to do was make it better for the public when I talked to the public, and help him make it better when he talked to people, was, incredibly freeing to do that. As it relates to Fauci specifically, the guy is a jokester. I mean, he is like, if he meets some like young 30-year-old and from the comms team who's like, Dr. Fauci, I know you say it this way, but maybe you ought to say it that way. And he'll be like, oh, I should have you in my lab because you clearly have this degree in science that you have. But he says it very good naturedly. And then he'll always come back to them. Like if they'll ask a scientific question, he'll go, I don't know, why don't we ask Brad? Because Brad seems to have a lot of expertise in that field. And, Brad will kind of like, but he just kept it like he remembered people's names, and he does it in a way that like makes people feel included, like he recognizes them. And he's a super sweet, decent guy. I think not for nothing, but he's getting a lot of people attacking him now. And I just kind of go, okay, you're attacking him. What were you doing January 11th when he was downloading the sequence of the virus? What were you doing January 13th when he and his team were sending it over to Moderna to begin working on a vaccine? In fact, what were you doing the last 20 years while he was creating the mRNA platform and funding it? So these politicians who are like, Tom Cotton, who's saying like Fauci must be fired, they miss the fact that the guy actually, we would not be in the situation we are with these vaccines, quite honestly, if we didn't have basic science funding and if we didn't have people like Fauci working with the private sector on the development of these platforms.
Right. And it's, imagine like without, this COVID, Fauci is kind of probably one of the most, in terms of name recognition, like, so well known. As a guy probably, 2 years ago, if you paid someone $1 million, probably, 99, no one could never name him. Now he's kind of in the vernacular. And
he just got knighted by Italy.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. It's, I'm part Italian, so I want to like feel that maybe runs in the family.
Lord Fauci.
So, one question about, since you brought up Fauci is, what about this thing? Did it come from a lab or was it, natural? Any comments on that? And then I want to go, I don't know if you can hold your book up because we actually, I think, have an opportunity for people who want to buy the book. But answer the lab question first, then we'll go to the book.
Yeah. So we don't know. I mean, the intelligence report basically has both views expressed with low degrees of confidence, which, by the way, it's not unusual. I mean, it took 7 years to understand where the origin of SARS. So there's legitimate arguments that are both circumstantial. If you're going to say it came from a lab, you'd say, well, we know this thing aerosolizes pretty easily. So is it possible that there was a test tube broke, a lab leak, and a few people got exposed to a lot of it, went home, infected their family, et cetera? Yes, that's quite possible. There's no evidence of it, but it's possible, certainly, and we ought not to dismiss it. Is it possible that it came zoonotically from a bat? Well, that's how it usually happens. And so that's why it's the assumed case, because this has happened many, many times this way. But there's yet no evidence either. So the Chinese have to be pressured into cooperating so we can get to the bottom of this. It's important that we know. There's a scene in the book, one of the chapters opens where the president says, where Trump says, this thing was cooked up by the Chinese in a lab, wasn't it? And the woman who's a character in the book who responds to him responds by saying, "Mr. President, can I tell you a bedtime story?" And then she tells him a bedtime story in a room filled with like 15 people in the Oval to explain to him how this works.
Interesting. So I think people can get your book. I think we're going to circulate a link that allow them to get a signed copy before you make the bestseller list. So I know when that happens, they're going to be going for more than retail in the aftermarket. So preventable, right? The inside story of how leadership failures, politics, selfishness doomed the U.S. coronavirus response. And I think, the point is in the book, and I did get a chance to kind of read some of the excerpts. I mean, coronaviruses do happen. The question is, what do you do when they happen? It's kind of, it's more the response, right? And, the outcome in some scenarios, like the vaccine was almost in some ways a really extraordinary positive outcome. It was kind of dealing with the interim between when the outbreak occurred and when we got the vaccine in people's arms. I want to spend the last few minutes just on healthcare innovation, which is obviously the focus of this conference. Any kind of insights from your experience or your work in Town Hall Ventures that you think about in terms of healthcare innovation investing right now, or that are particularly salient or profound that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah. So I don't invest in life sciences, and I only invest in companies that are trying to bring services to underserved communities, because I actually believe that's where the biggest macro opportunity is. That's where we need to change as a country. And there are solutions. They just need to get to everybody, and they need to get there in culturally friendly ways. So I only invest in companies that are taking on those problems. And if I meet a CEO who says, "Hey, Andy, I've got a great way to make money in healthcare," it's going to be a pretty short conversation. There are actually lots of ways to make money in healthcare. Most of them don't interest me. But if someone says to me, "Hey, I found there's a really hard problem, and I think I know how to solve it, and I got a few of the ingredients," we're going to have a great conversation. If they've identified the right problem. And so, we've invested in a company that focuses exclusively on reducing maternal mortality and improving maternal health in the Black community by providing the kind of care and services that people get in other services. Seniors, people with, serving who have addiction, living with addiction, people who healthcare for the homeless population, healthcare in rural America, where a lot of things are going away. These are all extraordinarily interesting problems to solve. We've invested in, companies that we invested in early that are doing quite well are companies like City Block Health, Village MD, and what they have in common is extraordinarily gifted, passionate, mission-driven CEOs who have a great model. Most of them are taking risk. Most of them are providing culturally sensitive care and services. We just invested in a company called Plume, which does nothing but provide healthcare to the trans community. And it's an almost entirely trans management team, and they understand the issues at such a subtle and important level of healthcare in that community. And we have such a broad, diverse country that you pick any one of these niches, and they're all quite big opportunities. And if you solve the problem well, and delight customers and provide real solutions that save money and provide better care, which isn't hard to do because most people get really crappy care. It's a winner. So that's where I see opportunity, and that's what excites me. But I know people have different passions and different skills in other areas of healthcare, and there's no shortage of them, and it's a hot market.
And just to clarify, it's in terms of your investments, do they have to be like a social impact B Corp, or can they be a for-profit entity? They're
all for-profit.
Okay.
And actually the point of our fund is to demonstrate that you can make a greater return of capital by focusing on these types of problems than you can if you're like, I'm going to consolidate the orthopedics industry, or something which is a clear financial play but doesn't add anything to the system. Right. So that was the bet when we raised our first fund. The first fund has performed at the top of its peer group, the very top of its peer group. So the second fund was raised, and it's even bigger, and the second fund is also doing incredibly well. So I think part of it is we found the right problems, the right entrepreneurs. We have another, the other difference is that we don't lead deals, and we are kind of the validator of deals of this type, and we only invest with great leads. So in some ways, if you look at our portfolio, you're like, oh, it's the best of Google Ventures, NEA, General Atlantic, So it's at some level, it's a great portfolio, because if people have a company in this space, namely targeting underserved people, and they're one of those firms, they'll probably bring it to us and say, basically our goal is to convince them that they should carve out, 10 to 20 million in a round for us, meaning they'll get less. So our value has to be to the CEO entrepreneur. It has to be to the other investors to say, yeah, these folks are value added. And so when I get excited is after the investment's made. So I have all of our CEOs have my cell phone, and they're all instructed that there's no issue too small to text me or reach me, anything. Because I ran a big company. I've been through a lot of what they've been through. If there's something that I can answer for them in a minute that they would spend 2 weeks on, usually it's a small issue. Usually it's like, should I let this person's not performing? They're kind of being a jerk. I want to give them another chance. And sometimes it's like, if you do that, you're going to fire them in 6 months, So you can spend the 6 months or you cannot. But based on everything you just told me, it's not going to work. Or they need an introduction to a CEO, and most of the big healthcare companies, many of them are also investors in our fund. So we can make those introductions without shame, because we think these companies are doing good things, and we hope they're building really good businesses.
Awesome. Well, we're hoping to find some of those deals here in Southern California. I think we're at the end of our time. I want to thank you, I think primarily and most importantly, for your service to the country and to all people who are facing healthcare challenges. And I think, having dynamic and well-informed and practical leaders like yourself at the front of the line really makes a difference. And selfishly, we're extraordinarily excited to have you here back in Southern California to make it a little more accessible to what I think is a incredible innovation community. And I think I speak for all of us that we're pleased once again to have had you join us tonight, but also look forward to interacting with you in the future and the days to come. So welcome home. Congratulations on your book. Remember, preventable, guys. If you get one, I think we're going to circulate the link. He'll send you a signed copy. So Andy, welcome. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Darren from Lava, who's one of our key collaboration partners and helps us put on this event every year. So Darren, good to see you. And I think it's over to you. And once again, thank you for your partnership and collaboration on First Look this year and prior years. And I know you prepped the team, so I'm excited to see what's in store for us.
I'm excited to see this too. Andy, thank you so much for that keynote. So both Andys, I guess, I'm addressing that to both of you. What a fascinating look at what's happened this past year. Good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Ng. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the executive director of Lava now. And this year we've really transitioned over. I also have to thank not only Andy, but Steve Gillison for doing a fantastic job with taking over the helm of First Look. So it's a Herculean job. And so Steve definitely in the background deserves a lot of kudos. Again, for those of you who don't know me, I've really kind of shifted the direction for Lava. We're focused a lot more on the investors, and we look at the ecosystem as a giant mesh network of siloed communities, from IP ideation, like the universities that we're profiling here, to the various pathways of exit, whether that's IPO, M&A, private equity, or even BK, unfortunately. So our role is to facilitate communication, collaboration, and deal flow between the different nodes of that giant mesh network. And we now have a ton of communities, Lava PE, believe it or not, Lava Bio, FinTech Lava, Food Tech Lava. Please go and check us out. There is a community probably in there for you, including the VC Advisory Board and a soon to becoming Angel Advisory Board. But enough about Lava. This year, our role with the first look was to get the startups prepped up, and the folks at Wilson Sonsini have been great. Matt Bresnahan has been a wonderful partner throughout the years of First Look. I don't even know Matt. Matt will be coming on in literally seconds here, I think. He will be moderator for the day. And but he's been around First Look for, geez, Matt, how many years have you been around First Look?
I was trying to think back, at least 5 or 6. So yeah, sometime.
I think at least that, because I feel like you've been around almost as long as I've been around. And I know, I think my first look was in 2011. So
yeah, that might be so.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and thank Ken for all your support for First Look. We appreciate it. And I'll let you introduce the first grouping here.
Okay. Well, thank you